On the one hand, I wept because we were such a family. Even the crew, we were all really close, like a family. So they'd have me ironing and going, and then what happened, kids? John Boy, more coffee and things, just to have me in the scene. But as an actor, it was just boring.
Every Thursday night, millions tuned in to hear the same peaceful wrap-up. Goodnight, John Boy. The Waltons was an absolute ratings giant for CBS. But the show didn't die because of behind-the-scenes drama or a network rivalry. It was killed by 3 minutes of television. One brutal, unscripted feeling scene at a fresh gravesite broke the family's core foundation, triggering an immediate, irreversible ratings collapse that ultimately drove the show off the air for good. How does a show that defined Thursday night television lose its soul in less than 3 minutes? The scene at the grave. CBS aired the season 7 premiere, titled The Empty Nest. Up until this point, the show had endured minor cast shuffles, but the foundational architecture remained intact. Viewers knew what they were getting. 3 generations of a close-knit Virginia family pulling together against the harsh financial realities of the Great Depression. At the very center of that home was Zebulon Grandpa Walton, played by veteran actor Will Geer. Grandpa was the show's warmth, its humor, and its moral bedrock. He was the anchor who made the mountain feel safe. Then real life collided with the television schedule. In May 1978, just months before filming for season 7 was set to begin, Will Geer passed away at the age of 76. The producers faced an impossible choice. Recast the patriarch, write him off-screen with a simple dialogue line, or face the loss head-on. They chose to face it, but no one anticipated that addressing Geer's real-world death on camera would deliver an emotional strike from which the show's ratings would never recover. The scene opens with a long, somber shot of a windswept hilltop on Walton's mountain. There are no dramatic orchestral swells, no hysterical tears, and no theatrical monologues. It is just Ralph Waite, playing John Walton Sr., standing completely alone beside a fresh wooden headstone carved with his father's name. The silence is heavy. The camera stays tight on Waite's face, catching the genuine grief of an actor who had just lost a real-life friend and mentor. John Sr. looks down at the dirt, shifts his shoulders, and speaks in a quiet, ragged voice to the cold ground beneath him. You know, Dad, the house seems so empty with you gone. Things are changing so fast. It was a brief moment, lasting barely a couple of minutes, but the impact was seismic. In television, certain scenes operate as narrative point of no returns. This was one of them. The writers weren't just eulogizing Grandpa Zeb. They were unwittingly eulogizing the show's entire core premise. When John Sr. uttered those words, he was stating a cold truth that resonated far past the fictional narrative. The house was empty. The multi-generational safety net that had made the Waltons a top-tier rating titan for 6 seasons had vanished. Just 2 years earlier, Grandma Esther, played by Ellen Corby, had suffered a massive, debilitating stroke in real life, severely limiting her ability to perform and stripping the show of her sharp, feisty presence. John Boy, played by Richard Thomas, the actual lens and narrator through which the entire audience experienced Walton's Mountain, had already packed his bags and exited the series at the end of season 5. When Grandpa Zeb died, the delicate balance collapsed entirely. Grandpa was the bridge between the old world and the young kids growing up on the mountain. He was the buffer who smoothed over conflicts between John Sr. and the children. Without him, the cozy kitchen table felt desolate. The warmth was drained from the farmhouse, replaced by a bleak, inescapable air of grief. Audiences felt the shift instantly. Before this scene aired, the Waltons was a top 10 powerhouse, regularly holding down the second spot on national television and crushing heavy-hitting competition. But after John Sr. stood at that grave, the tone of the series permanently shifted from comforting nostalgic escapism to somber, heavy realism. Viewers who tuned in on Thursday nights to escape their own worldly troubles were suddenly confronted with stark, unvarnished loss. The illusion of the indestructible American family was shattered. The numbers don't lie. Following The Empty Nest and that pivotal grave scene, the show's Nielsen ratings took a direct, immediate hit. The audience began tuning out by the millions. The comforting warmth had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of lingering sorrow. And no matter what storyline the writers cooked up next, they couldn't recapture the original magic. The grave scene marked the exact boundary line where the Waltons ceased being a cultural phenomenon and began its slow, inevitable slide toward cancellation. It proved to be the single standout moment of the entire 9-season run. Not because it was a flashy stunt or a controversial plot twist, but because it was too real. By killing off Grandpa Zeb, the show lost its heart. And once the heart stopped beating on that windswept hill, the ratings plummeted into an irreversible decline that ultimately dragged the Waltons off the air for good. Grandpa's death broke the foundation, but a few other key moments delivered the structural blows that followed. The domino effect once the core anchor of the family was buried on that hill. The writers found themselves desperately trying to manufacture new drama to keep viewers glued to their screens. But instead of saving the series, these subsequent episodes only accelerated the damage. Each major plot shift and catalyst scene served as another nail in the coffin, driving home the reality that the tight-knit family unit fans had fallen in love with was fracturing beyond repair. The first major warning sign that the show was losing its identity actually occurred shortly before Grandpa's death, in the Season 5 double episode titled The Burnout. In this landmark story, a fire breaks out in the upper level of the iconic Walton homestead, gutting John Boy's bedroom and destroying his prized writing manuscripts. The scene where the family stands out in the dark front yard, watching flames billow out of the second-story windows, was intended to be a high-stakes dramatic thrill. It drew massive ratings at the time, but narratively, it marked a dangerous turning point. The physical destruction of the upper floor was a dark metaphor for the structural collapse of the home itself. For 5 years, the farmhouse had served as an impenetrable fortress against the cold reality of the Great Depression. The fire proved that Walton's Mountain was no longer safe from tragedy. When the dust settled, the room was rebuilt, but the cozy, claustrophobic comfort of the original set was permanently altered. The home felt different, darker, and noticeably less secure. Shortly after the fire, another heavy, symbolic scene shook the show's foundations in the firestorm. In this Season 5 episode, John Boy decides to publish an excerpt of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf in the local newspaper to educate the town about the rising threat in Nazi Germany. The local community responds with rage, culminating in a tense, unsettling night scene where the townspeople gather to burn books in the middle of town. Standing around the blazing fire, the Waltons watch as their peaceful, isolated mountain community succumbs to anger, fear, and mob mentality. It was a brilliantly acted scene, but it completely stripped away the show's escapist appeal. The outside world, full of political hatred, impending war, and social violence, had officially breached the borders of Walton's Mountain. The show was no longer a gentle retreat into a simpler past. It had become a bleak, tense drama mirroring the dark anxieties of the late 70s. Then came the physical departures that dismantled the living room dynamic altogether. In Season 8, the writers were forced to handle the exit of Michael Learned, who played the family matriarch, Olivia Walton. The show explained her absence by revealing that Olivia had contracted tuberculosis and needed to move away to an Arizona sanitarium to recover. The scene where Olivia quietly says goodbye to her children on the front porch was excruciating for longtime fans. Without Olivia's calm, steadying presence to handle the household logistics and comfort the children, the kitchen lost its spirit. John Walton Sr. was left wandering through an increasingly empty house, attempting to play both father and mother to the remaining younger kids. The warm, bustling breakfast scenes that had once defined the show's opening acts were now quiet, awkward affairs featuring a fraction of the original cast. Perhaps the most devastating structural blow, however, occurred when the producers attempted to fix their biggest casting mistake, bringing back John Boy. After Richard Thomas left the role in Season 5, the character was off-screen for years. But in Season 8, the show decided to recast the iconic role with actor Robert Whiteman. The scene where the new John Boy walks back through the front door of the farmhouse was meant to be a joyous, triumphant homecoming. Instead, it was an agonizing moment for the audience. The chemistry was completely wrong. Whiteman was a fine actor, but he lacked the natural warmth, sharp intellectual energy, and quiet intensity that Richard Thomas had brought to the character for 6 years. Rather than restoring the show's original heart, this recast scene served as a constant, glaring reminder of everything the show had lost. Viewers weren't seeing John Boy return. They were watching a stranger walk around in a beloved character's clothes. By the time the show entered its final 2 seasons, the wartime storylines had scattered the brothers into military service across the globe. The cozy farmhouse, once overflowing with laughter, arguments, and multi-generational wisdom, had devolved into a gloomy staging ground for somber updates about the Second War casualties and economic hardship. The magic was gone, and the audience was fast following it out the door. When the camera stopped rolling, could a TV family built on genuine love survive real-world tragedy? A slow disintegration of a family, the show was never like other hit television series of the 70s. It wasn't driven by a single star, a catchy gimmick, or flashy action sequences. It was a delicate, interconnected ecosystem. The entire production relied on the believable, organic chemistry between 3 distinct generations living under one roof. If you pulled out a single brick, the whole wall shuddered. If you pulled out 3 or 4, the entire structure collapsed. And that is precisely what happened over a brutally short span of production years. The first major crack in the foundation appeared at the end of Season 5 when Richard Thomas decided to walk away. As John Boy, Thomas wasn't just the main character. He was the primary storyteller and the audience's emotional link to the world. The entire show was framed through his eyes, his journal entries, and his iconic, soft voiceover narration closing out each night. Thomas was young, fiercely talented, and understandably terrified of being permanently typecast as a wholesome country writer. When he opted not to renew his contract, it sent shockwaves through the production office. The writers tried to pivot by shifting the narrative spotlight onto the other siblings, but the core perspective of the series was shattered. Without John Boy acting as the audience's surrogate, the story lost its central narrator and moral compass. Then came the physical, real-world tragedies that no script writer could control. In November 1976, Ellen Corby, who played the beloved Grandma Esther Walton, suffered a severe and life-threatening stroke. It left her paralyzed on one side and drastically impaired her ability to speak on set. The production team, fiercely loyal to Corby, kept her in the show's universe, eventually bringing her back to the set in Season 7. Her bravery was inspiring, and the emotional reality of her condition was woven directly into her character's story. But the dynamic of the house had irrevocably changed. The feisty, sharp-tongued grandma who constantly kept Grandpa Zeb in check and provided tough love to the grandchildren was gone. In her place was a quiet, fragile woman struggling through real-life recovery, making the farmhouse kitchen feel infinitely more somber and heavy. Less than 2 years later, in May 1978, the show suffered its fatal blow when Will Geer passed away at age 76. Geer had been the energetic, twinkling heart of the set, serving as the real-life patriarch who kept spirits high during long filming hours and bridged the gap between the veteran actors and the child stars. Losing him wasn't just a storyline obstacle. It devastated the cast on a deeply personal level. By the time Season 8 rolled around, Michael Learned, who played the firm yet gentle Olivia Walton, had hit her breaking point. Exhausted by grueling production schedules and frustrated by the declining quality of the scripts following Geer's death, she requested to be written out of the show. Her departure was handled by sending Olivia to a sanitarium for tuberculosis, leaving Ralph Waite's John Walton Sr. entirely isolated. Waite himself was struggling under the weight of the show, facing budget cuts, cast departures, and his own personal battles. The actor was forced to carry the weight of the entire series on his shoulders. The exhaustion on his face during the final seasons wasn't acting. It was the visible strain of a man trying to steer a ship that was rapidly taking on water. So, where are they now, decades after the lights went out on Walton's Mountain? The patriarchs have long since passed into history. Will Geer died in 1978, Ellen Corby passed away in 1999, and Ralph Waite died in 2014. Key supporting icons who gave the town its color, like storekeeper Ike Godsey actor Joe Conley and Corabeth actress Ronnie Claire Edwards, have also passed away. Yet, against all odds in the brutal landscape of Hollywood, the bonds forged on that studio lot endured in real life long after the cameras stopped rolling. The surviving adult cast members, including Michael Learned and Richard Thomas, remained active, respected figures in the entertainment industry. Learned went on to win 4 Primetime Emmy Awards and starred in major projects across television, while Thomas carved out an extraordinary stage and screen career, appearing in acclaimed series like The Americans and starring in high-profile national theater tours. Remarkably, all 7 of the actors who played the Walton children are alive and well today, having navigated life after child stardom with unusual grace. Richard Thomas continued his stellar acting career, while Judy Norton, who played Mary Ellen, transitioned into theater directing, writing, and hosting a popular digital series analyzing behind-the-scenes moments of the show. John Walmsley, known to millions as Jason, left full-time acting behind to become an accomplished multi-instrumentalist and studio musician, performing alongside major music legends. Mary Elizabeth McDonough, who played Erin, became a successful author and public advocate, writing memoirs and novels about her experiences growing up on television. Eric Scott, who brought Ben Walton to life, stepped away from the Hollywood grind altogether, finding long-term success running a major private courier and delivery business in California. David W. Harper, who played Jim Bob, chose a quiet, private life outside the public eye, occasionally reappearing to greet devoted fans at nostalgia conventions. Cami Koteler, the youngest child Elizabeth, earned her degree and spent years working as a passionate educator and charter school principal, ironically teaching right near the real Waltons mountain region in Virginia. They didn't fall victim to the infamous child star curse that destroyed so many young actors of their era. Instead, the real-life Walton siblings built genuine, lasting lives, frequently gathering for anniversaries and reunions. They proved that while the fictional family on screen eventually fractured under the weight of loss and time, the real family built behind the scenes was constructed to last forever. Characters weren't the only thing changing. The very world around Walton's mountain was slipping away. How the mountain grew cold, the true secret ingredient of the early seasons, was never just the dialogue or the plot twists. It was the warmth of the environment. The show was built on a simple, universal human longing, the comfort of home. For the first 6 seasons, the Walton homestead served as an emotional sanctuary. No matter how dire the financial crisis of the Great Depression grew, viewers knew that when evening fell, the entire family would gather around a crowded dinner table, share a meager meal, and find solace in each other's company. The setting felt safe, timeless, and sheltered from the harsh storm of the modern world. By the time the show entered seasons 8 and 9, however, that central sanctuary had physically and emotionally thawed away. The timeline had advanced out of the Depression era and plunged headfirst into the chaotic, terrifying reality of World War II. This historical shift completely destroyed the core premise that made the show work. A series that was once about a family pooling their meager resources to survive together under one roof was suddenly forced to become a war drama about a family scattered across the globe. One by one, the Walton boys were drafted and shipped off to military bases in the Pacific and Europe. John Boy was serving as a war correspondent. Jason was in the Army, Ben was fighting in the Pacific, and Jim Bob was preparing for enlistment. Instead of scenes packed with lively family debates and warm hearthside chats, the show was reduced to long, gloomy sequences of aging parents sitting by a radio, waiting in fear for official telegrams from the War Department. The cozy, crowded dinner table that had once been the visual centerpiece of the series was now stark, quiet, and half-empty. This story's evolution transformed the physical set itself. The camera work in the final seasons became noticeably colder, capturing wide, hollow rooms where loud laughter used to echo. Walton's Mountain was no longer an idyllic retreat. It had become a quiet staging ground for grief, worry, and economic hardship. When the writers tried to fill the void left by the original cast by introducing distant cousins, in-laws, and boarders to live in a house, it only highlighted how empty the place truly was. Longtime viewers didn't want to watch strangers occupying John Boy's old room or sitting in Grandpa's chair. They wanted the original family magic back, and that was something the narrative could no longer deliver. Compounding this narrative decay was a radical transformation in television culture itself. The Waltons had originally premiered in 1972, riding a massive wave of cultural nostalgia during a turbulent era in American history marked by the Vietnam War and political scandal. Back then, audiences desperately craved wholesome, slow-paced, heart-driven stories about traditional moral values and rural resilience. The series was a quiet, acoustic guitar ballad in a sea of loud television. By 1980, however, the American cultural landscape had shifted dramatically. The turn of the decade ushered in the high-octane era of 80s television. Viewers were no longer interested in quiet, period-piece dramas about rural survival during the 30s. The primetime television ratings were suddenly dominated by glitzy, high-stakes, fast-paced escapism. Audiences flocked to glossy primetime soap operas like Dallas and Dynasty, which were packed with wealthy oil tycoons, flashy fashion, outrageous cliffhangers, and backstabbing greed. At the same time, action-packed adventures like the A-Team and Knight Rider were capturing the imaginations of younger viewers with high-speed car chases and explosions. Against this flashy, high-tech new competition, the Waltons looked like a relic of a forgotten era. A quiet show about an aging father running a lumber mill on a quiet Virginia mountain simply couldn't compete with J.R. Ewing getting shot on Dallas. The slow, deliberate pacing that had once been considered the show's greatest artistic strength was now viewed by network executives as slow and outdated. The landscape had moved on, leaving Walton's mountain feeling colder, quieter, and increasingly out of touch with the world around it. The environment had changed, the audience had migrated, and the mountain was finally growing cold. Ratings may have plummeted, but did the mountain ever really go dark? The aftermath, when CBS finally blew the whistle on the Waltons in the spring of 1981, there was no massive, heavily hyped series finale event to send it off into the sunset. Instead, the weekly series quietly flickered out on June 4, 1981, with an episode titled The Revel. It was an episode that felt less like a triumphant victory lap and more like a gentle, lingering echo of a show that had already spent 2 years running on empty. The final scene of that last episode was classic, understated Waltons. The camera pulled back slowly from the dark silhouette of the iconic white farmhouse as night settled over the trees. One by one, the few remaining family members called out their trademark, "Goodnight," across the quiet, darkened bedrooms before the screen finally faded to black. There were no shocking twists, no grand speeches, and no dramatic resolutions. It was simply a quiet goodbye to a family that had already been slowly slipping away week by week. Yet, despite the steep decline in ratings during its final 2 seasons, the network quickly realized that while the weekly series was dead, the public's deep emotional connection to the characters was far from buried. The magic wasn't completely gone. It just needed a different format. Throughout the 80s and 90s, NBC and CBS produced a series of 6 hugely successful television movie specials that brought the original cast back together. Starting with A Wedding on Walton's Mountain in 1982 and culminating in A Walton Easter in 1997, these specials served as a healing salve for longtime fans. They brought back key original actors, including Richard Thomas and Michael Learned, to properly wrap up loose ends, celebrate major life milestones, and honor the memory of Will Geer and Ellen Corby. These television movies proved that while the weekly grind of a primetime series had run its course by 1981, the American public's love for the family remained profoundly intact. When you step back and look at the broader picture of television history, the true triumph of the Waltons becomes undeniable. Created by Earl Hamner Jr. and based on his own childhood experiences growing up in Schuyler, Virginia, during the Great Depression, the show defied every single industry rule when it premiered in 1972. At the time, CBS executives were in the middle of their infamous rural purge, systematically canceling popular country-themed shows like the Beverly Hillbillies, Mayberry RFD, and Green Acres in favor of slick, urban, socially progressive programming like All in the Family and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Nobody in Hollywood expected a slow-paced, deeply earnest drama about a poor Virginia family to survive on Thursday nights, especially when CBS slated it against 2 rating juggernauts: The Flip Wilson Show on NBC and The Mod Squad on ABC. Industry insiders jokingly referred to the Waltons as the show's CBS